Hello and welcome to this guide to getting your proven healer title. I've made this guide for new players so you don't have to play perfectly in order to pass this challenge. The proving grounds scale with your eye level, so this isn't the sort of challenge that you can outgear. That said, certain Azerite traits I found to be very useful for this fight. The really key Azerite trait here is Enduring Luminescence, which will increase the duration of the atonement applied by your power word Radiance. This makes the AoE aspect of this fight far easier to deal with. As far as your other Azerite traits go, then they're essentially at your discretion. I've gone for a couple of DPS traits, but it was hardly game breaking. You can use a variety of consumables from the current expansion, and doing so really takes the edge off this fight. The most important consumable, in my view, is the War Scroll of Intellect, which will increase your intellect and that of your party by 7% for essentially the whole run. I've also used the War Scroll of Battle Shout, which increases the damage that the party are doing. I've used the Battle Scarred Augment Rune to increase my own intellect. I've used the Flask of Endless Fathoms, which also increases my intellect. And I've used Swampfish and Chips to increase my haste slightly, because I'm relatively cheap. If you really wanted to splash out on this one, then you could use the top level buff food, which is likely a Captain's Bountiful Feast or something along those lines, but I didn't think that was necessary. After every 10th wave, then you get the opportunity to drink for about 10 seconds, so make sure that you bring along top level mana water. I used Seafoam Coconut Water for this fight. For this challenge, I opted for a fairly unconventional talent build. Although usually in 5-man content you'd be looking at using Schism, I've actually gone for Twist of Fate, which I found procs very often, particularly in the harder waves, and gives you the healing and damage when you really need it. The second tier talents are essentially at your discretion, and I didn't find that any of them really impacted the difficulty of the fight. If I were forced to choose, I'd say Masochism, but it's really up in the air on this row. I've made another very unconventional choice in the third row, where we'd normally be looking at power word Solace, which is generally considered to be much stronger than the alternatives. I've actually selected Mindbender here. I have tested both of these, but I found that Mindbender worked far better than power word Solace in this scenario. The fourth row talents are again essentially at your discretion. I did play around with using Dominant Mind to try to mind control key mobs on this fight, but the ones that you'd actually want to mind control are immune. I've also played around with Shining Force and I found that to be occasionally useful, and I think that's what I ended up going for in my attempt, but really it's pretty much a wash on this row. I found that Sins of the Many was really my only choice for the fifth row. The additional damage and by extension the additional atonement healing was really too good to pass up. Now you may have noticed that I'm using Purge the Wicked in the sixth row. Now this is a very much maligned talent, but I found it tremendously useful in this environment. The ability to apply Purge the Wicked to additional targets through the use of the penance, which you'll be using rotationally, saves up global cooldowns, which makes the healing requirement a lot easier. In the final row, predictably enough, I've gone for Lenience. Much of my strategy in this fight was applying atonement to the entire party through the use of power word Radiance, and by taking Lenience then you've got 3% damage reduction across the entire party for most of the fight, which really helps with those tricky AoE waves. The Proving Ground is made up of 3 sets of 10 waves. The 10 waves go through in sequence and then they repeat, and then they repeat again. Some of the waves are harder than others, so timing your cooldowns is really key to this fight. Essentially, if you get the strategic layer right, then you don't have to worry too much about the tactical layer. For a Discipline Priest, the 2 hardest waves are waves 4 and 9, so you really want to focus your cooldown usage on those 2 waves. The waves of medium difficulty are 2 and 7. They're not as hard as 4 and 9, but they're still relatively tough. The other waves are all pretty easy, and you shouldn't struggle too much with them. You could theoretically use the Mindbender on every single wave, because it's got a 60-second cooldown, which lines up very nicely with the timing of the waves. However, that really ties you into using it as soon as it's available, rather than when it's actually needed, which can result in overhealing, so I don't recommend that as a strategy. In my attempt, then I used the Mindbender on waves 2, 4, 5, 7, 9 and 10, and that's what I recommend that you do as well. That means that you're using it essentially on every second wave, and you're hitting the most important waves using it as a healing cooldown. It's really important that you use pain suppression on wave 4 because that's a really difficult and nasty wave. You could theoretically use it on wave 9, but in my attempt then I found that my entire group clustered up on wave 9, which meant that I dropped a power word barrier instead. This left me with pain suppression left over, so I used it on wave 10, although I probably didn't need to. I didn't strategise for my use of power word barrier. Instead I kept it in reserve for when my party was bunched up and was taking AoE damage, where it would be most effective to use it. In the event then I used it on wave 9, but that can be variable depending on how your party behaves. I made really suboptimal use of Rapture. I think I only used it on the final wave. If I'd been playing better, then I think I would have used Rapture on waves 2, 4, 7 and 9. But this really illustrates my point that you don't have to be a brilliant player or play perfectly in order to beat this challenge. As discussed earlier in this video, the Proving Grounds consists of a sequence of 10 waves, which then repeat infinitely, getting harder and harder at each repetition. You only need to get to wave 30, but I've actually decided to start this at wave 30 and take you through to wave 40. I decided to do this because the damage is a lot higher in wave 30 to 40 than anything that you'll have to deal with in order to complete this challenge. My strategy for the first wave is extremely simple. You just need to dot up all of the mobs, and then you need to apply atonement to the entire party by using Power Word Radiance. To do this, you just stand between the melee and the ranged, and then let fly with the Power Word Radiance, and it will cover everyone. Nice and easy. Once we've blanketed the entire party with Power Word Radiance, then we just go into our DPS rotation, which means prioritising Penance on a target, using Smite as filler, and keeping our dots up where we can. If anyone gets a little low, as the tank is here, then we'll just apply some spot healing by using Shadow Mend. Once we drop combat, then I'll use some Penance to top up the tank. Wave 2 is one of the tougher waves, largely due to the inclusion of this Hive Singer chap. He casts a rather nasty AoE. Now sometimes your colleagues will interrupt this, but sometimes they won't. The best way to deal with this is to stand between your ranged and your melee and hit everybody with Power Word Radiance. You should then use the Mindbender for additional atonement. In this wave, you really want to focus the Hive Singer with your damaging spells. Your party are pretty switched on and they'll tend to prioritise injured enemies. You may have noticed a purple swirl in the upper left of my screen. This shows when the Twist of Fate is active, and as you can see, it has an awful lot of uptime in this wave. Now, the large Aqualite hits like a truck, and he also casts a debuff on a random party member. After 5 seconds, this causes a damaging explosion, so you just want to dispel this. Wave 3 is a nice easy one. Once again, we're going to dot up all of the mobs, we're going to apply atonement where necessary, and we're going to use our DPS rotation. I'm using Power Word Radiance here. As you can see, the whole party is taking damage. These tunneler chaps are going to chomp a random colleague. Now this applies a nasty dot, which lasts until the target is healed above 90%. This is just like the Grievous affix in Mythic Plus. Fortunately, blanketing the party using Power Word Radiance and then doing your normal DPS rotation pretty much trivialises the chomp mechanic. If you find that the atonement healing that's provided by Power Word Radiance isn't really cutting it for the chomp, then you can just apply some spot healing by using Shadow Mend, but it's only occasionally necessary. Wave 4 is probably the hardest wave, so you'll need to use some cooldowns. We have 2 Aqualites, and they both hit like trucks, and they both cast the debuff. We're going to focus on taking this Flame Caller down first, so just use your standard DPS rotation. The tank's taking a lot of damage, so we're going to use Pain Suppression and we're going to use the Mind Bender. Both of the Aqualites cast debuffs, so you're not going to be able to dispel everything. You want to prioritise dispelling auto and kit. You don't want your tank to be jibbed down. If you get targeted though, you can just run out away from the rest of your party and eat the damage. That's absolutely fine. If your tank is about to get hit and your dispel is already on cooldown, don't forget about mass dispel. I used it earlier in this wave. Wave 5 offers you a bit of a breather after the well-supervised craziness of Wave 4. The Hive Singer does his usual AoE, which you're going to manage using Power Word Radiance. We'll just focus him down. If the tank needs spot healing, we'll use Shadow Mend. After about 20 seconds, the Conqueror enrages. We'll just pop the Mind Bender and then spam Shadow Mend on the tank. The Conqueror is going to get bored after a while and will shrink back down. Once the Hive Singer's down, we just need to deal with the Conqueror. I found that the best way to deal with him is just to apply Atonement to the people who need it, and then spam Smite on the Conqueror so that he's got that absorb effect on his melee attacks. As you can see, he's a bit of a bullet sponge, but by applying Atonement to the tank and spamming Smite on the Conqueror, then we can use this as a mana regeneration period.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Wave 6 is another easy wave. We're going to use our usual approach of dotting up all of the mobs, applying Atonement to anyone who takes damage, and then DPSing down the mobs one at a time. There's only one Aqualite, so we can dispel the debuff every time he casts it. You saw Suli the Survivalist, the party's hunter, get chomped there by a tunneler. We'll use Atonement healing to top him off, nice and easy. This isn't an AoE wave, so if anyone gets low, like the tank, we'll just spam Shadow Mend. And now we're just going to top off the tank, ready for the next wave. Wave 7 can be quite tough. It includes a Hive Singer who you'll want to prioritise killing. He'll do his usual AoE, which you'll counter by blanketing your colleagues with Power Word Radiance. After about 15 seconds, the two Conquerors will enrage and absolutely wail on your tank. You can counter this though by spamming Otto with Shadow Mend, which, when empowered by Twist of Fate, is definitely enough to carry you through. I've also popped the Mind Bender to provide that additional Atonement healing. He's really awesome, guys, you should definitely try him out. Once the two Conquerors have blown their loads and rage-wise, they'll shrink down again. At this point, we'll keep Atonement on the tank and top him off through Atonement healing, and this is going to effectively manage our mana, which at this point is getting rather low. Wave 8 is essentially a redux of Wave 6, and it's nice and easy. Just dot up the mobs, apply Atonement where necessary, perhaps through Power Word Radiance, and then DPS down the mobs one at a time. Your teammates are generally much better at avoiding the fire patches than pugs would be. In this run, however, Kit, the assassin, had an absolute flap spasm and ran through as many pulls as she could. It's no bother though, and it didn't hurt the run. Fucking state of your situational awareness. Nice and easy. I'm running a little low on mana at the moment, so I'm going to use the Mind Bender on the next wave to make sure that we get a bit of mana regeneration going. Wave 9 is really nasty with a large Hive Singer as well as an Aqualite and a Tunneler. We need to use Power Word Radiance to keep Atonement on the whole party to deal with the Hive Singer's damage, and this is also going to help us with the Tunneler's Chomp Dot. I've just summoned Squiddy, and fortunately the party bunched up at this point, which meant I could use Power Word Barrier effectively. If I'd been playing more optimally, I would also have moved into the barrier, rather than taking full damage like a div. The large hive singer has a pretty high health pool, so he won't go down quickly. You may have to spam Shadow Mend in order to keep the party up, but that's okay, because the next wave is relatively easy, and then you'll be able to drink.
Four, three, two, one.
Wave 10 is relatively easy, because Kevin the Arcanist pops Time Warp. You'll nuke down the Flamecaster, who seems to fall over very quickly, and then work on the Conqueror. After around 15 seconds, the Conqueror enrages, but that's absolutely fine. We'll just cast Pain Suppression on the tank, we'll call upon the aid of Squiddy, and we'll use Shadow Mend to keep the tank up. A small Aqualite does join while the Conqueror is enraged, but that's fine, because we've used our cooldowns. I've remembered to use Rapture here, but if I hadn't, I could have afforded to spam Shadow Mend, because I'll be drinking once the wave finishes. Once the Conqueror falls over, we'll keep Atonement on the tank, spam Smite on the Aqualite, and when he casts his debuff, we'll just dispel it. Nice and easy. When wave 10 ends, you'll hear a squelch sound, and that means that you can start drinking. You only have a 15-second delay before the next wave though, so you need to start drinking immediately. Alternatively, if you're me, you can spend the time hot dogging and grandstanding to your friends on the internet.